watching Veracity Hill. Here is your host, Dr. J.
Well, a good day to you, and thanks for joining us here for another episode of Veracity Hill, where we are striving for truth on Christian nationalism. This is the second week in a small little series we are doing on the concept, the ideology of Christian nationalism. And last week we had on Tim Stratton and Josh Klein to talk about their take and sort of a nuanced position on Christian nationalism. This week we have a different guest on to present some reasons against Christian nationalism. But before we do that, I do want to say we passed 1,000 subs on YouTube. And so we now have the super chat feature unlocked for those that want to chip in to help us. They want to ask a question, they want it seen, or comment that they just want other people to see. You can use the super chat feature. I am admittedly still learning more about how all of this works, but I'm excited that we finally reached that threshold. So thank you to the new subscribers. Thank you especially to Idol Killer on YouTube. Warren McGrew, he shared about where we are at in our pursuit of 1,000 subs. So I know many of the new subs, I literally think he sent something like 40 new subs our way. So much thanks to Warren for that, and appreciate his kind comments. If you are a fan of Idol Killer and you did come across our channel through him, be sure to say so in the chat. We already have some people who are tuning in and watching our program today. I also want to say that if you share this video link, whether it's a YouTube link or Facebook, if you share this link on your profile on some social media platform, do so, send me an email through the Veracity Hill contact form, and I'll send you this book, Wise Stewards, also written by our author today, and it's a great book on Christian parenting. I have 15 copies in my inventory, so the first 15 people, we will send you this book for free as a thank you for sharing the link. So share the video, send me a screenshot, either through direct message, Veracity Hill on Facebook, or send us a message through the contact form at veracityhill.com, and we'll send you this book as a thank you for sharing our video. Okay, so let's jump into it. Our guest today is Mike Austin. He is professor of philosophy at Eastern Kentucky University. He's known for his works on moral philosophy and philosophy of religion. He's also the current president of the Evangelical Philosophical Society. He also has a Wikipedia page, which is pretty neat. Not all philosophers have that. And so he's done a lot of great books, written books on parenting and the pursuit of virtue and ethics. And his forthcoming book, which we've already dropped the link in the chat, which you can pre-order, is on the concept of Christian nationalism. It's called American Christian Nationalism, published by Erdman's. It's coming out in a couple months. And in this book, Austin provides his reflections on and concerns of this movement called Christian nationalism. So I want to thank our guest, Mike. He's also been a friend of mine for many years as we've crossed paths at various EPS Society meetings and on Facebook. I'm sure we've had some engagements over the years. So thanks for coming on the program today.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.
All right. So as we get into the concept of Christian nationalism, Mike, we should sort of start with a basic question. What is Christian nationalism?
Yeah, it's the $12 question these days. Yeah, I'm going to do what philosophers like to do and start with what it's not, because I think there's a lot of confusion, and understandably so, because the term gets thrown about. Like, I want to say this was in March or April. There was a commentator on MSNBC. I wasn't watching it, but I saw it referenced online. I think she was a writer at Politico, and she said that Christian nationalists believe that human rights come from God. Well,
so Thomas Jefferson was a Christian nationalist.
Yeah. It's like, then it's okay. That might be true. Many of them do, but that in and of itself it's not sufficient. And it's not even necessarily, well, it might be necessary, but at any rate, if you say that, then yeah, if that's all it takes to be a Christian nationalist, then I would be one. And I'm writing a book saying why we shouldn't. So I think sometimes people too, I've noticed, use it like, so people especially after the Dobbs decision and the continued stuff about abortion, people say, well, look, if you want abortion to be illegal, then you're a Christian nationalist. Well, that's not the case either. I mean, those, or politically conservative Christian equals Christian nationalist. So all that's wrong. And even though people talk that way, well, philosophers in charge, the world might be just as messed up, but we'd be more precise in our language. So at any rate, those things are important because I don't want to defend any of those claims or argue that people shouldn't be able to do that, right? That's part of part of our democratic society. We make the case for what we believe, what we think policy should be, elect people, hash it out, and start it all over again in the next 2 or 4 years, but in certain ways. So for me, in the book, I don't try to come up with like this airtight philosophical definition, but I do give just a sketch like that covers enough of people who are self-identified as Christian nationalists and enough of these things. So some of them aren't on their own sufficient to be a nationalist, but I think things you find in common against people writing and then people kind of doing the speaking tours and the conferences and things like that. They want to argue that America was founded as a Christian nation, right? Now you can believe that and not be a Christian nationalist, but that plays a big role because they're trying to make like this historical connection with their views about politics in the United States with the founders. And sometimes the connections are made, and sometimes I think they're really egregious. I think the second thing, I'll give 5 of these. I brought these up on my computer because I'm getting old, my memory's going, but they think that the government of the U.S., so this is a key point, I think the government of the U.S. should promote a particular kind of Christian culture. Of course, and usually it's going to be their kind, right? So when there is, the biblical worldview kind of language, but it's very precise and specific. So it's kind of like, there's a lot of all or nothing, right? If you don't believe what the Bible says that we say it says, then you're not a real Christian, those kind of things. So what scholars talk about, it's sort of what does he say? Guy that wrote The Religion of American Greatness, Paul Miller, kind of an Anglo-Protestant culture, which that doesn't sound necessarily bad, but when you start cashing it out, there's some good and bad things about it. But the way that a lot of the Christian nationalists cash it out are basically using the force of law and the coercion of law and sometimes even punishment for people to fall in line with their view of a Christian culture. They think Christians should pursue political and cultural power to take dominion over America. You hear a lot of that language. So kind of like theocracy. And sometimes the overlap's pretty strong. That's different than influencing, right? Where I got my master's at Talbot, part of the idea was influencing the university and the culture for Christ. But that's different than dominion, power for dominion's sake over others. 2 more. We should prioritize American interests over the interests of other nations. Now, in a sense, that's right, but it's what is our interest? So, like, I watched some of your thing last week with Tim and Josh. Yeah, I would agree that whatever the objective interests are of the United States, if they're actually our true interests, then they're going to help not just our nation to flourish, but others as well. And I think where we get into problems is it becomes more like a self-centered self-interest that a lot of them are propping up.
So the concern with that one is if you were to take advantage of another nation, right? So you don't. I think what Tim and Josh had in mind last week was like, promoting American values across the globe in the sense that we should not let Nazi Germany expand, but
right.
Because that, American interests can be sort of vague on its own, that could mean we start taking advantage of another nation, which has been done in American history, and that's not a good thing. We want to pursue the flourishing and benefit of others, right?
Yeah, and I think, you think about American values from the Constitution and just historically, things, of course, we've fallen short in our borders and beyond, but equality, liberty. Tom Morris wrote about The Everyday Patriot, where he argues service is an American value. I think you can see that clearly. Even, our military and our government, we've misused our power, but we've done a lot of humanitarian good within and outside of our borders with our resources. I think that's important. When you say American interests, then we've got to say, okay, cash that out. What are those? And a lot of people's take on what those are won't be satisfying to followers of Jesus. Lastly, and this is really what I think harms us spiritually, is there's often, this word's important, there's a fusing of the American identity and the Christian identity. So it's not just I'm a Christian who God has sovereignly placed to be a citizen of the United States. It's my American and Christian identities are fused, they're intrinsically related, right? They can't be separate. It's almost like impossible in principle for one to trump the other in terms of their view of nationalism. So I think those 5 big points are like a good enough sketch for what it is, to give us enough content to think about it well.
Yeah, this fusing, right? So people might say, America first, and oh yeah, God as well, as opposed to maybe having a rightly ordered position of identity that it's Jesus first, right? The Christian faith is first, because America is flawed and can go astray and do evil things, and we should not support whatever America does, because America is not a perfect country. So whereas with this fusing, it's like whatever America does is right, except that sort of makes it a little incoherent, right? Because the current state of affairs is not right to the Christian nationalists, which is why they want to improve upon the current framework, or change the framework altogether for what they think is a better good. So maybe there's a little cognitive dissonance there. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think they would probably say what you did. Well, the true America, or the real America at its best, but then that's when you have, okay, well, what is that? What's it look like? And that's, at least in some of these books and some of the online stuff these guys do, that's where some deep problems arise.
Yeah. Okay, before I ask you some more questions here, I do want to remind people, if you share this video, and you're one of the first 15 people, we will send you one of Mike's books, Wise Stewards. It's on Christian parenting. Great little book. It's a short read as well. We have 15 copies. Mark in the live chat says we have 8 copies. What Mark doesn't realize is that I've got a couple here and a couple elsewhere too. So we do have more available. So we already have Amber. Thank you for sharing the video. Much appreciated. You've already hopped on it. So you'll be getting a copy. And others, if you want a copy of Mike's book here, share the video and send me a message either through Facebook or the veracityhill.com contact page. Okay, Mike, so your book here, Critiquing Christian Nationalism, you laid out sort of 4 points that help us to identify what a Christian nationalist is. In last week's conversation, as I was talking to Tim and Josh, part of the issue that arose was that there was this newer social phenomenon, say about several years ago now, and people kind of had a hard time, as is common with social events and new ideas that become more popular, had a hard time putting a label on what the phenomena was. And so I think what was communicated was, well, there are these different strands. And so Tim, in order to clarify his position from, say, a Stephen Wolfe type of person, distinguished himself as an American nationalist. I think that was the label he used. Correct me if I'm wrong, Tim, if you're watching this. An American nationalist, and really distinguishing himself from a fellow like Wolfe, who Josh said is like a theocratic nationalist. Tim kind of came across more as just this American patriot, who loves America, agrees with while the history of America is imperfect, agrees with the values and ideals to pursue, and is also a Christian. So do you share that same sort of approach to the sociology of the concept? Do you think that there were these sort of multiple movements maybe? What's your take as someone who's, been a social observer and a philosophical critic as well?
Yeah. In some ways, I definitely agree that there are different streams and segments. So, I mean, some of them will say, well, you're not a real Christian nationalist. To others who say they are. I mean, it's like Christian, right? When you talk about that word, there's, that's even meaning, the potential meanings are even broader. So yeah, in some ways it's a mess. and that's where the clarification comes. So I think this is where, for me, like I would call myself a patriot. I think that's consistent with being a Christian. I think as long as my patriotism is downstream of my commitment to Jesus and his way, and the theology, Christian theology, scriptures, all that stuff, right? I think where Christian nationalists often get, and I bring this out the book's only about 80 pages of text. It's meant to be like a short little, here's what it is, here's some ways it contradicts American values, Christian values, and here's a little vision for going forward. Because I think there's some excellent scholarly books about it. Most people aren't going to pick up a 250-page book. I mean, I struggled reading through some of them, and that's what I do, and so that's kind of the point of it, is for like sort of the person in the pew, so to speak. That's, am I Christian nationalist? Am I patriot? What's the difference? I hear these terms. But anyway, so getting on a tangent there. So I think that's what makes it difficult. But I think historically, like scholarly, politically, historically, and really even broadly speaking, culturally, nationalism has some connotations and some definitions. And so while philosophers, and we just stipulate definitions all the time, I think the danger of, I guess, I don't know if the danger is, that's probably not the right word. I think my concern about like sort of a redefinition in the way that Tim does it, those guys, I mean, it's not what Wolf and Torben, it's not what these guys are writing about and doing. So in that sense, he's very different. But I think there's so much baggage with the word nationalism, because it's, whether it's Nazism or fascism with Mussolini, sort of in the scholarly literature and the historical and political connotations, that I think you can get everything you want. And Tim and we've had conversations about this online, so it's no new thoughts for him. I think you can get everything you want out of a robust patriotism while not having the baggage that nationalism can bring. So if that makes sense.
Yeah. I was going to ask, it seems like there's maybe like a soft or weak view of nationalism, because the word nation, you want to be proud of your nation. But then there is more this like hard line nationalist. And what does, what is a nationalist in the, traditional sense? I'm not sure a lot of people would even know how to define what a nationalist is. Like the Nazis were the Socialist Nationalist Party, if my memory serves correct. So what does that mean to be a nationalist?
Yeah, and so historically then, and the way it's worked is when nationalism is in full, or at least when it's working in a society, or maybe operative, effective, there's a cultural majority, and then the culture minorities have to fall in line or else. Either it's political, social officers, those kind of things, taken to an extreme like Nazism, right, where it ended up with concentration camps.
Yeah.
But I think that's a key thing. And so one scholar calls nationalism it's an internal imperialism, and I think that's right. So imagine if a dictator took over the U.S., right? I don't know who. Doesn't matter. Some imaginary dictator takes over in 100 years from China or something.
Well, there's
right?
one guy who wants to be dictator for at least one day, he said. Just.
Well, that's right. Yeah. I'm trying to avoid all discussion of that, only because I don't think I can take it anymore.
Sorry.
Yeah. No, that's okay. I was purposely not trying to do that. That's okay.
So let's imagine that there's someone who is a dictator, right? What does that look like? Yep. You said interior imperialism. Yeah,
so they say, here's what it means to be an American now. Or think of what was that show? And I haven't watched the whole series, Man in the High Castle on Amazon. It's this pretend future where half the U.S. is German and half under control of the Japanese. So something like that. Well, the values we hold to just as Americans now, at least that we aspire to, they start squashing those. We can't live them out. If we try to live out liberty or equality or freedom of speech or association, we get fined or jailed, right? That's kind of imperialism. Nationalism would be internal in the sense that, so say like people like Wolf or Torber and Isker get their way and that Christians are in power, whether it's a Christian prince or we've just taken control of all of the institutions of society. Then when people don't fall in line with what we want, their liberty is squashed. I'm not talking about murder or criminal justice. I'm just talking about a Muslim who tells, this is an example from, I think it was, can't remember which of these guys, whether it's Wolf's book or Torben Isker, like they would say, at least in principle, it's okay to jail a Muslim who tries to convert a Christian in their Christian America. This is their own words, right? So things like that. But it doesn't even have to be that. They would, I mean, you think about their views, unlike Tim's and Josh's and probably yours and mine, about what Christian influence should look like in the United States is so much stronger, narrow, coercive, that a lot of people who would say are followers of Jesus would be in trouble. So I think that's a concern that I have with nationalism historically. It contradicts those key American values, and then of course fundamental Christian ones as well. The way that historically it's been taught, thought about, and implemented.
Yeah. So for you in your interpretation and understanding of Christian nationalism, you would say that label does apply to these, hardliners, people who want to change even the Constitution, whereas, say, Tim and Josh, they would say, well, those would be like a theocratic nationalist, and we could still call ourselves, an American nationalist. But again, I say that as, I think they approach it as sort of like this weak nationalist, as in patriotic. You, on the other hand, would say, no, best to leave that label for these hardliners and just call what we love about America, call that patriotism, that we do have this love of country. And you're saying here's a way we can distinguish, because now I don't know what Tim and Josh would say about, say, free speech on this, but you mentioned one of those Christian nationalists would say it should be punishable for a Muslim to try to convert, proselytize a Christian. I mean, that seems like just a direct confrontation with the First Amendment and freedom of speech in the country.
Yeah. Well, they also want a religious test for being in office. Only Christians can hold office, which Article 6 of the Constitution, no religious tests. So, so I think that's what's astounding when you get down into the weeds with some of these guys that are advocating this kind of nationalism. I didn't know it going in, but man, it's contradictory to some fundamental American values. And of course, we're struggling right now. What does it mean to be a nation of equality, liberty, service? How does that cash out immigration or economically? I mean, all those questions, and I'm not going to pretend to have those answers. But when somebody puts forward a vision of America that clearly contradicts them, and I think that's one reason Tim and Josh reject it, because they are patriots. They hold to those values. I hold to those values, and I think that, I have hope that our best days are ahead of us. It's hard to say that right now, where it just feels like an utter mess on both sides of the aisle, so to speak. But I think our better days are ahead of us, but it's not going to be this path. Christians are going to have to play an important role, I believe, just given the demographics of our society. But I just hope and pray we don't go this way, because a lot of what happens with these guys, and then I'll be quiet, is they say stuff, slap a Bible verse or a reference on it, and go on. Like one example, one more, and then we can move on to what you want to talk about. But in Torben Isker's book, they talk about we should revere our founding fathers, and then they have a Bible reference after it. Philippians chapter 1. In Philippians chapter 1, I'm like, well, I wonder what that says. And it says something about basically having reverence for God our Father. Well, it's not, that's like
proof texting.
I was just dumbfounded. Yeah. And like in the way there's not even, it's just obvious there's not a single way to read that consistent with it. So anyway, those are some, when I actually read this stuff, it's like, man, some of it's challenging. It helped me to think through, what do I think Christians should do politically? And I've got some thoughts tentatively, but man, it's sure not this stuff.
Let me ask you here. It seems that Christian nationalism has, on your account, crept into churches, but it's not, it doesn't seem like it's being explicitly preached from the pulpit. It's not like, hey, I'm gonna, the pastor's saying we should do this, but it's like these subtle ways it's communicated. Is that a fair way of saying the social phenomenon occurs?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of places like that. There are some places, like my own church is a PCA church, and the pastor's like explicitly disavowing it. The way that I'm talking about it. But there are churches that are just on board. So there's Dream City Church in Phoenix. A friend of mine's a pastor at a church in Phoenix. He actually just had a book published. Oh my goodness, it's today. He'll be so happy I'm mentioning this. It's called Disarming Leviathan. It's about ministering to your Christian nationalist neighbors. So Dream City is a church that they've had Turning Point USA, but they're basically they're going whole hog on a lot of the what I would call the hardline Christian nationalism stuff. So there are churches, small and large, around the country that do that. But yeah, my guess is the vast majority of white evangelical or evangelical more broadly churches, they're kind of, it's more like what you described. It's kind of there's some confusion. There's a sense in which because of the rapid social change in our country, some for good, some for ill, I think there's a defensiveness that a lot of Christians might feel like the values are changing. I mean, I think of, like, I just retired high school soccer coaching, the world that my high school players lived in 2020 to 20, when I stopped in 2022, I graduated high school in 1987. It was radically different in so many ways, like the speed of social change. So I understand some of the impulse, but I think too, not everyone that says they're a nationalist is this true of. But my own sense is that for a lot of people, there's some empirical stuff about this. There's a sense of fear and trepidation. And that's when, as followers of Jesus, we've got to go to God and the kingdom of God, because we're, it's first or second Peter, we're a holy royal priesthood, a holy nation, right? That's our primary citizenship, is the kingdom of God. And what does it mean? I mean, if they could survive Rome and Bonhoeffer in the church could survive Nazi Germany, then we can survive red or blue. But I want to do it well with a good witness. And the kingdom of God's not hampered by it. But man, think of all the advantages we have because of the freedoms in America for the church to do work, not just here, but around the world. And that's actually my deepest concern, are the spiritual goods in churches and in the ministry that the church has here and around the world. Because America has given us freedoms and resources to do incredible good around the world.
All right, we've got a super chat question from Fisherman's Corner. He says, let's pretend Christian nationalism was successful. Then which denomination, and what would stop Roman Catholicism from becoming that denomination? I'm not sure if that's so much a comment of his as it is a question, but for someone like you.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine. I mean, I don't know enough about, look, I think you can find, there's Christian nationalists in the PCA, the church I'm a member of, and the SBC, a lot of independent fundamentalists, independent Baptists. I don't see the Roman Catholic Church, how it currently is constituted, like coming back that way. But who knows? I mean, there's so many things we would never predict about the future that I'm just not going to do it. But yeah, I don't know. I think it would go across denominational lines. And I think this is part of the problem. It's that for many people, those political identities and beliefs are more foundational. So that I know for some people he's a controversial figure, but Russell Moore's talked about numerous conversations with pastors, and the pastor quotes the Sermon on the Mount. You've probably seen this occur, and he goes, "Where'd you get that woke stuff?" And he says, "Well, it's not woke. It's just Jesus and the Sermon on the Mount." And then this is the key thing. Then they say, "Well, that doesn't work right now." And this is something that happened over and over again. And this is something, as American Christians, the pragmatism, of that nature, man, we've got to that's not the way of Christ. And so that's my concern too. I think a lot of people identify as Christian nationalists too. Some of the empirical stuff shows, some shows they're highly religious. Others show that they're not really. There are people who are atheists who call themselves Christian nationalists. So it's just no wonder people are confused about terms.
Yeah,
it's a word salad mess. Yeah.
All right, let me ask you about.
So the short answer is I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I would think for which denomination you'd probably get some coalition of Protestants stopping the Catholics. Yeah. So maybe something like that would happen in our version of The Man in the High Castle, which I haven't seen, but I really want to, because I feel like there's so much I can learn from there, and thinking about like possible world theory and envisioning sort of a world like that. So I really should get into that show. I know it's been out for quite some time now. Let me ask you about Granny. So Granny is a typical church-going woman, and she is very patriotic. And on Memorial Day weekend, she likes to have a flag up on stage at church. Is she a Christian nationalist if she likes having an American flag up on stage at a church?
Yeah, in and of it, I mean, on its own, that wouldn't be sufficient for it. I mean, I'm kind of person, like, I don't want to see an American flag on the altar on this, like, up there. Not because of an anti-American thing or anything like that, but it just makes me uncomfortable to see that and within, the house of worship. I've gone to churches where where there is a flag there, and I've gone to ones where they aren't. But that would make a Christian nationalist. Granny probably just loves America, loves their country, probably has, knows people who died in one of the wars, maybe lost family members and wants to honor them. So, yeah. So I wouldn't want it up there, but I wouldn't say Granny's a nationalist because she does.
All right, so let's say the flag's not on stage. Let's say it's in like the narthex or foyer or even outside the church. Is that still like, or should we just not have any American flags on church properties? Are we called to?
Yeah.
And maybe it depends on the season in America. I mean,
yeah, that could be.
Yeah, I mean,
that's a hard question for me.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll just say without an argument, my gut reaction is part of me says, no, they shouldn't be anywhere. Then another part of me says, look, outside, it's there. This is the country where our church members are citizens, right? So I guess I'll put it this way. I'm much less hesitant or concerned if it's on church grounds versus it being in the sanctuary or on the altar, so to speak, or, at the pulpit.
Yeah.
Because I think those communicate very different things. Because part of our calling is to live out our citizenship as followers of Jesus within the nation that we're in, that's vital.
Yeah. If you had to give 3 points of consideration for someone who has heard Christian nationalism is bad, might not know that their neighbor Bill is a hardcore Christian nationalist, what are sort of 3 tips that you would, suggest to someone to keep in mind as they talk to someone like Bill, or for them to simply be reflecting on those types of conversations?
Yeah, I think for people whose faith matters to them and are working through these issues, going back to the scriptures, because when I read so I gave you the really silly example about honoring your forefathers, but there's a section in Torben Isker's book where they say Christian nationalism is loving our neighbor. And who is our neighbor? They ask the question, who is our neighbor? That should sound familiar, right? Because the parable of the Good Samaritan, right? That's the question the guy asks, who's my neighbor? After Jesus says, well, of course, the point of the parable is really Jesus flips it on its head. Then he says, be a neighbor, right? It's not who is your neighbor along ethnic or national or religious lines. It's just, from my perspective, human being made in God's image. If I can help them, I'm going down the road, I do that. So I think when you start looking at the treatments of Scripture and you start looking at, and even just the commands to be loving, the great commandment to love God, love your neighbor, virtues like humility, compassion, love, there's a conflict there. And so rather than just going off on people, I'd say, well, let's look at it together. I mean, you can find some of these books in libraries or online fairly inexpensively. Go through it with them, see what they think. Because a lot of people that would say they're Christian nationalists, of course, I've never read either of these books, or some of these guys that are doing the conferences and using their churches to foster it. The worry for me is, while I think it's relatively a small amount of people who are like hardliners in the sense that these guys are, it doesn't take a lot of people to sort of maybe not be all the way there, but be enough of the way there that the hardliners can move them in society. And that's a danger for the church and our society. So asking questions, the scriptures, then I just thinking like, well, what are the core values of America? And are those consistent with Christian nationalism or not? That's another good one, right? Break out the Declaration of Independence or the Bill of Rights, the Constitution. Talk about that stuff a little bit, because there'll be times where they line up and times where they sharply are in distinction. And then lastly, I would want to talk again with other Christians about what's the impact of all this on our spiritual formation, on our faith in God and our church communities, because there's so much disunity. And if the church could just figure out a way to be more deeply united around Christ and the gospel and the Spirit, then people maybe wouldn't be looking so much to a Christian prince or the next red or blue president to save them, right? They'd be like actually entrusting our lives to God. And all those other things matter, but they're not ultimate. But politics are penultimate, right? They're really important. As we know, they can do a lot of good or ill. But for the Christian, right, our home is somewhere else, our ultimate home. And we've got to remember that.
Yeah, I think on this last point, you mentioned that Americans are looking to a prince to maybe solve their problems. And one of the things that I've frequently told people to consider is that the sooner you realize we are living in Babylon, the sooner you can be more effective at how to love your neighbor and reach people with the gospel. People still want this Jerusalem living, right? They want to be living in a society that has the values of Jerusalem. But we are in Babylon. We are in Rome. We are living amongst the Romans. And the sooner we realize that, the sooner we will stop culture warring for the sake of culture warring. I'm not saying be disengaged from culture. I'm just saying change the strategy, change the approach. And so, yeah, then if we're living in Babylon, we're living in Rome, we're not going to be looking to a prince to solve, those issues. In fact, the prince may be from Rome, may be from Babylon. And so really, we do want King Jesus, but that return is coming. In the meantime, how do we live in harmony with one another? And I think that the values that we see in the American founding documents does provide a way to do so. Mike, let me ask you with this last question here. Do you find that your Christian faith, your interpretation of the scriptures does lead to, I want to say this without being too provocative, but does it lend itself toward the American experiment? Do you see these values in scripture and the values that may transcend the cultural context of the scriptures? Do those values transpose or even lead to the American experiment?
Yeah, I think there are so many of them are there because, look, I'm not a historian, but from reading and people that know this stuff, my understanding is, sort of one part of our foundation are from sort of, broadly speaking, Judeo-Christian values, consistent with sort of, yes, to that extent. We've got another foot in the Enlightenment, right, so to speak, some of those political philosophy and stuff. And so I think there's a reason maybe that Jesus Christ's name is never mentioned. That's important in those founding documents. I'm not sure what the reasons are. I have my suspicions, but yeah, I think something like it because of this, that you can treat other human beings as if they have dignity. And there are naturalistic, other religious, atheistic accounts of what that is. But at the end of the day, my own view is the strongest sort of the strongest philosophical foundation for human worth and dignity, apart from what we can do or make or help others do or make, is being made in God's image, right? That intrinsic dignity that we just have bearing God's image. So I think that one thing that the American experiment hasn't always gotten right in practice, but that it's in the documents and in what many of us aspire to is just that, right? It's because of that. Those rights come from God. And so the government's here to serve us, not us to serve it. We have rights to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness or flourishing or whatever, because those are granted to us by God. And so I think, if I was king for a day, I'm sure I could think of some stuff to change. And some of it would probably work and some wouldn't, right? But
so Trump will be dictator for a day and then you'll be king on the next day. And
that's right. Yeah. I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't understand anybody who wants to be president really ever, but especially these days. It just seems, they've got to have like a special either narcissism, which I think a lot of politicians have. They're down this, not just these current two.
I think it's they want to be president so they can show off their golf handicap or how far they can drive.
Yeah,
that's a knock against both major party candidates, by the way.
That's right. I didn't watch the debate. I actually had a church meeting, thankfully, but I read a bit about it and I did see that part. I'm like, well, at least we're talking about golf now and not like other things like inappropriate things that were discussed in the last one with Rubio and him. So yeah, it's a joke. Yeah. And the problem is, I guess I would say this, and this is broadly for Christians and anybody. My understanding of the American experiment is a lot of it hinges on a fairly well-educated populace. That doesn't mean everybody has to have a college degree, or even a high school degree. But it means people have taught how to have just some basic skills of critical thinking, and where the arguments matter more than the TV lighting or the speech making or the dramatic music in your commercial. And I know we've been away from that for a while, but I feel like the actual truths that we should be pursuing that's not even on this. It's just about power, it seems to me these days. So much, it's always been about that. I feel like the room given for truth is shrinking, and that's where we've got to push back and be countercultural as followers of Jesus.
Dr. Mike Austin, thanks so much for joining us on the program today. For those who want to check out his forthcoming book, you can pre-order now. We dropped the link a second time in the chat. The book is American Christian Nationalism, Neither American Nor Christian, published by Erdman's, coming out in October. Great time for the book to come out right around election cycle, so nice job on that one, Mike. Thanks again, and we'll be in touch. Thanks for all your great work in everything you do in Christian philosophy. I appreciate it very much.
Well, appreciate your work too, Kurt, and thanks for taking the time having me on.
Great. God bless you. Well, we've got to take a short break here. When we come back, we'll be jumping into sort of a round two on what the Bible says about polygamy. So it's another segment of Dr. J Answers. Stick with us through this short break from our sponsors.
You're listening to Veracity Hill with Dr. Kurt Jarris.
Hi, I'm YouTube.
And I'm Apologetics 315.
Oh, that's nice. What do you do again?
I'm a video hosting platform for Christian apologists.
Oh, you're Christians who apologize for being offensive.
No, that's not what that means.
Oh, I don't like your tone.
My tone?
Oh, I'm sorry. 1 sec. Sorry. There. That'll help you not sound so offensive.
Apologetics315.com, your home for Christian apologetics videos and community.
No one told us we could actually stand on stools. So unfair.
Evangelical Christians are talking about hell. What if we believe what we believe because we've always believed it? What if the gospel is really a matter of life and death? We want you to open your mind, open your Bible, and rethink hell. At rethinkinghell.com, evangelicals look at what the Bible says about hell, putting conventional and controversial views to the test.
To Veracity Hill with Dr. Kurt Jarris.
Thanks for sticking with us through that short break from our sponsors. And I do want to go back and give a special shout out to Fisherman's Corner. Thank you. You are, in the history of Veracity Hill, the first Super Chat fan, Super Chat commenter, questioner. Thank you so much. Very much appreciated for your comment and your question in the first half of the program today. Well, now, during this segment of Dr. J Answers, I want to look back on last week's material talking about polygamy in the Bible. And so I've invited on to this segment my friend, Dante Stack. He is an author, abstract thinker, and he calls himself a desperate believer. And he's lived across the globe. He's a good friend of mine, a nice thinker as well. He loves studying ancient Near Eastern various cultures and religious beliefs, and sort of has a knack for exploring all sorts of things. And on YouTube, he gave me some beef for my comments last week, so we're here to talk about it mano a mano. Welcome back to Veracity Hill. You made an appearance in the first season, as I recall. Didn't I interview you, I think, for one of those episodes? Dante?
You did. Thank you for bringing me on.
Yes. So welcome back to the program.
And yes, I have a beef with you. Man. All right. I want to go through, if it's all right with you, I want to go through your response to the meme that was shared by the Bible for Normal People.
Yes.
and go through kind of what you said, the points you were trying to make, the Bible verses, and then I have my own Bible verses to throw in there. So my beef really with your presentation was you started out by saying nowhere in biblical text is polygamy supported or promoted. That was your bar. So if I can get above that bar,
yeah,
then I can win.
Yeah. I agree to your terms. Yes.
All right. Now, so that's bar one. Now I'm also creating a lower bar for myself, which I think I can probably win you over, is that your proof text or your main text you were using, 2 Samuel, is not a good text to use to make your case.
Yeah, well,
and I think
okay, so yeah,
that's a pretty. I can make a strong case there, maybe a weaker case for what the Bible has to say about polygamy. And my main thing is, man, this is tough. This is a tough text, and I didn't feel like you gave it, or not text, tough topic, sex in general in the Bible, and marriage as well. And I didn't think you gave it enough gravity.
Yeah. So what I would say is, the passage, I think it was 2 Samuel 12.
Correct.
So I wouldn't use that as a go-to text to support monogamy. The question was regarding that meme, if I remember correctly, how should we interpret that passage in that text? And so if I remember correctly, the woman who shared her thoughts on that passage, and that was shared by the Bible for Normal People, she was basically saying, well, evangelicals today, monogamy, this and that, and then, quotes David, I had many wives, this and that. So, yeah, it should be obvious that there are Old Testament figures that have multiple wives. I mean, it's strewn about throughout the narratives of the Old Testament texts. So the question is, how do we interpret those passages? And my contention is that these passages are descriptive. They are not prescriptive. And as such,
okay, all right.
Yeah. So as such, I don't think that Yahweh promotes or supports polygamy, but rather that he has permitted it for the sake of his people. He's willing to work with them. He's permitted it. And for many of these guys, it was a status symbol, right? For many of these leaders, these ancient Near Eastern leaders, not just the Israelites, but you see this as a status symbol. And there are warnings against it. And the narratives themselves provide a warning against it. So that's sort of my contention.
Okay. All right. Well, let's take a look at that. So you're saying, because I'm a verbal processor sometimes, and I gotta think through these things. And you said this last week, that it is the instances of polygamy are descriptive, not prescriptive. So there's another situation. If I can find a prescription for polygamy, then I would win. And then second, you said God's permitted, or is it fair to say allowed as a synonym?
Yeah, that's right. So, and again, an allowance or a permission to me is different than a support or promotion of an ethical value. So,
agreed.
Okay.
So the first text you pointed to, actually, before you went to 2 Samuel, you went to Deuteronomy 17:17,
which is the warning.
Which I pulled up.
Yeah.
That's the warning. So I wanted to pull this up. It's not really evidence for my case, but again, I think it's a weak case you're making trying to use this text. So this is the warning about kings. Deuteronomy 17:17. My translation, just that I pulled up on Bible Gateway, says NIV. So we're rolling with that.
Sure.
He must not take many wives, or his heart will be led astray. He must not accumulate large amounts of silver and gold. Now, this is talking about kings, not talking about everybody. So it is, once again, it's a warning specified for kings. Now, where we really come into trouble there is that word many. what does many mean? Does that mean 2? Does that mean 3? Or does that mean a profundity of wives?
Like Solomon.
11:3, I think. 1 Kings 11:3, I think, speaks to this. In talking about Solomon, it says Solomon, had 700 wives and 300 concubines. And his wives led him astray. Now, another translation I was reading earlier said, and it led his heart astray, or something to that effect, which sounds directly like a parallel, right? Like when the guy who's writing First Kings is writing, he's got Deuteronomy on his left, because he is clearly talking about, hey, Moses gave us this warning, boom, Solomon broke it. And many wives, we know at least our one context of that meant 700. Not 2, not 3, not 4.
Yeah, but
all right.
But remember the warning in Deuteronomy 17:17. So there is one assumption in our conversation, and I don't know exactly where you stand on this, but I would hold to an earlier dating of Deuteronomy. I don't think Deuteronomy was written during the exile or post-exile as part of like this composition of multiple sources, right? Documentary hypothesis. I know it's kind of, we're going a little weeds deep here, but I'm assuming that Deuteronomy was written before First Kings. So it is a warning and includes all the kings, not just Solomon. But we also see, and I would agree here with, when we look at David, I think it caused problems for him having many wives. Amber in our comments says, shown to be true. Here it is. None of these characters in polygamy had that work out very well for them, right? So that's my take, that in the OT we see these problems arise for these men. Not just that they would be led astray like Solomon had been led astray, but that it would just create family drama. There's favoritism amongst the wives. There's favoritism amongst the children of specific wives. And so as the Bible describes the context of polygamy, it itself serves as a warning against it, because it creates problems. And so that's why I interpret the Old Testament text as being descriptive and not promoting and supporting polygamy, but rather it demonstrates an allowance or a permission for it for those people in that time. Now, that's also important as an incrementalist, getting back to the Randall Rouser thing, because I see that Yahweh works with people where they're at and that there is moral progress. And my larger critique of Randall was that he cannot evaluate the Old Testament text without the moral progress that we have made in the course of human history. He is looking at it. He's what's the phrase? He's sawing off the branch that he sits on, right? You can't critique the OT unless you've come afar and had moral improvement, which proves incrementalism, which was my other point. But okay, back to our OT discussion here.
So and yeah, when we get to the end of this here, I don't know much about incrementalism. I'll have some follow-up questions as to, well, why did God choose incremental moral truth in this area and not this area? It seems like a sticky wicket, if you will. Okay, but let's get into 2 Samuel 12:8, because that was where you spent the majority of your time.
Yeah.
And you said, hey, 2 Samuel 12:8, that verse in particular, is used by people who claim the Bible supports polygamy as their proof text, but they didn't use the larger context. And the larger context is Nathan is talking about to David about how he took Bathsheba's wife.
Yep.
Or he took Uriah's wife, Bathsheba.
Yep.
I think you missed it on this one. This is not a text about polygamy at all. David sleeps with Bathsheba.
Yep.
That is breaking.
He's committed adultery. He has slept with a married woman.
Right. Levitical law says, and I had that text somewhere in my notes, but I'm not seeing it as I'm dancing through this page with my eyes. Levitical law says both Bathsheba and David deserved death. This is a text about you broke the friggin' law, you deserve to die. This is not about polygamy. In fact, when we go back to the context, then starting in verse 7, then Nathan said to David, "You are the man. You took that man's rubber ducky."
Okay.
Why? Because you didn't like yesterday's rubber duckies.
Yeah, we've got.
This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. All right, so here Nathan's quoting God.
Hang on, you just
I
said.
anointed you king over Israel.
Yeah, you said something. The rubber duckies, it's great. So the parable is about a rich man.
Everyone gets that reference.
Yeah. The parable is about a rich man who's got a lot of cattle and sheep, and instead of sacrificing one of his own from his own flock, he takes from a poor man. Right? This is the parable. So you said you didn't play with the other rubber duckies I gave you, which is itself an implicit critique of polygamy, because it's saying that all of these other wives you had weren't good enough. That is the implicit meaning of the parable.
No. Let's hear what God says. He says, when Nathan is quoting him, he says, "I anointed you king over Israel." I being God, right? I anointed you king over Israel. I delivered you from the hand of Saul. I gave your master's house to you and your master's wives into your arms. Now, you did not deal with that text. You just went on to the implicit meaning. But God is saying, I gave you those wives.
Yeah.
I gave you all of Israel and Judah. And if all this had been too little, and the wives being part of it, if all these wives had been too little, I would have given you even more. So how do you get around that? God gave David wives, plural. That seems like support and promotion to me. How can God give something that he doesn't support?
So this is a great question, but I really don't think it defeats my position, because when God allows or permits something, he's willing to still play within those rules. So as a permission, as a permittance, God in his providence plays within those rules of permittance. So we could say that in the ancient Near Eastern context that God gave people slaves, right, as, say, prisoners of war when you're looking at the Old Testament type of slavery. But does that mean that God condones and supports slavery? Well, we wouldn't quite say that. At least I don't think we would. I'd say rather that God worked with these humans in that time and place, in their socio-contexts, and so God doesn't support or condone, but rather works within. He works within those contexts. So that's where, when we come across this verse in 2 Samuel, I'd say, yeah, God says he would give him more in the rules of what God has created and allows. So part of God's general providence, you could even say. What do you think on that?
I mean,
so if I told you I'm going to permit you to go buy whatever candy you want, and
no, not permit. I am giving you whatever candy I want.
Yeah. So imagine I build a store and said, Dante, I'll give you whatever candy you want, right? And you pick 3 candy bars, and then you steal your buddies. And I say, well, look, I'm giving you this whole, I built this store for you at this present time. It's full of candy bars. I would have been willing to give you 5 more candy bars. Why'd you take your buddy's candy bar, right? Same sort of thing, where I think there are temporary purposes in Yahweh's goals of global dominion, long-term goals. And so he's willing to work with people where they're at. So in that same way, I mean, would we say that Yahweh supports giving everybody as many candy bars as they want? No, that's not quite right. I don't think that's a nuanced enough take on the situation. So, getting back to the verse here. Yeah, how are we to understand when Yahweh says he would give David more wives? Does that mean Yahweh, as sort of an objective measure, supports polygamy? And I think no. I think we do see that shift occur in the New Testament covenant. You see it in Jesus and in Paul, I would argue. So we might ask ourselves this. Dante, do you think that Christians should be polygamists, or has that now been done away with? And if so, when did that shift occur?
All right. See, that feels like a little bit of whataboutism, right? And maybe that's not the right terminology, but I'm not here to be like, hey, let's all be Mormon. Let's all get boogie with it and have 40 wives. That's not what I'm saying. But I think it's like, okay, if you're playing this nuanced game of God says he gives you things that he allows but doesn't actually like, it gets, and yet God is so on top of minutia and so cares so deeply in Levitical law about things that we don't give a darn about anymore. But this thing that still holds a huge measure of distinction for us today and is wildly important to us both now and then, why didn't God have more to say about this? If he tacitly was okay with it but wanted to incrementally move us away from it, throw me a line, man. And by man, I mean God, my Savior, Almighty. And, okay, so then I think your objection would be, okay, this is a cultural thing. It's a part of the, not just the customs, but how women have security. It's a patriarchal ancient Near East.
Yep.
So having a second wife is giving that woman a chance often. Is that fair?
Yeah. I'm game to say I think that what you said accurately reflects the context of the Old Testament. Yeah.
So then I want to point us to Deuteronomy 21, 10 through 14.
Is this, maybe I'm thinking of the Exodus 21 passage. Sorry, you said Deuteronomy.
Yeah, we could also, we got Exodus 21, 10. That one.
Yeah, some of the laws repeated. Yeah,
Exodus 21:10. If he marries another woman, he must not deprive the first one of her food, clothing, and marital rights.
Right.
Okay, that fits in with the idea of, okay, God allowed polygamy because that was actually what was better for
women. Now polygamy has to be regulated because he's allowed it. And what's happened here, the reason why this law exists, as I like to remind people, the law exists because it was real people having real problems. So a real problem would be that a man would marry a woman, he'd find another woman to marry, and he'd neglect the first wife, right? There was favoritism. So what do? Well, you got to make a law making sure that other wife is protected and cared for.
Yeah. All right. So with that in mind, Deuteronomy 21, starting in verse 10, when you go to war against your enemies, I'm assuming here we could also assume that enemies would also mean foreigners. So when you go to war against your enemies and the Lord your God delivers them into your hands and you take captives, if you notice among the captives a beautiful woman and are attracted to her, you may take her as your wife. Bring her into your home and have her shave her head, trim her nails, and put aside the clothes she was wearing when captured. After she has lived in your house and mourned her father and mother for a full month, you may go to her and be her husband, and she shall be your wife. If you are not pleased with her, let her go wherever she pleases. You must not sell her or treat her as a slave, since you have dishonored her. So this text, I think, kind of breaks that argument that the allowance for polygamy was merely about cultural, like the way the system was, right? With you got to care for women. No, this is about, hey, that lady's sexy. God saying, yeah, you just took over this territory. You want that sexy lady? Go take her. That's tough. It's a tough thing. And then if we had any doubt that this was about polygamy, verse 15 then goes into talking about what to do if you have two wives.
Yeah, so the verse about here, the foreign female captives, I think does support my point. If you go to war against your enemies, meaning you've killed the men, what are to become of these women, right? Again, patriarchal
society. The emphasis is because she's pretty. Take her because she's pretty.
It's sort of a laissez-faire.
It's
a laissez-faire approach. It's a laissez-faire approach to social.
So God only cares for women that are pretty? What about the uggos?
Well, I mean,
what about the uggos? Right? Because it's not God caring for the women.
There are men to also care for those women.
Then stipulate that. Why? I mean, this seems like on the surface, hey, men, you like them women? Go get them. It's okay. We got some rules. We got some boundaries.
Yeah, so
I'm
certainly not denying that there is an attractiveness aspect here to this regulation, but the purpose for the regulation was the welfare of women whose husbands had just been killed in battle. How are women like that to care for themselves, their children, etc.? This is one of the ways, among other ways, that Yahweh has ordered the ancient society to care for those women. There were no taxes that could be.
I thought you were going to say there were no uggos.
There were no taxes. There was no welfare system, right? So it's not like they could just be given some money. There was no system like that for caring for people who were poor and in need. So how do you create a welfare system in this society? And my contention is simply that you see moral progress occurring. You see moral progress when you look at the Israelites compared to other A&E societies, and there is development. Was it perfect? No, not at all. Do we think that by our standards today they fell short? Yes, we would say that. But I think
this isn't them falling short. It would be God falling short.
No, because God works with people where they're at in their societies today. We have laws today that people 300 years from now are probably going to laugh at us for, but which we think today reflects proximate justice, the pursuit of justice, getting close enough. But people are going to laugh at us for the regulations we have.
Okay, but again then, all right, easy fix on this one. What was it? Verse 10.
We've got a couple more minutes here, by the way, Dante.
Okay, all right. Well, then I'm going to skip that. I'm going to go straight to verse 28 of Deuteronomy 22. If a man happens to meet a virgin who is not pledged to be married and rapes her, and they are discovered, he shall pay her father 50 shekels of silver. He must marry the young woman, or he has violated her. He can never divorce her as long as he lives. All right. We kill a man if he sleeps with another married man, but not for the virgin. God doesn't seem to care about the plight of women in these verses.
No. I think he does. So I think this verse.
So why not? The woman's father gets the 50 shekels and he gets stoned. Why not that for raping someone?
Well, so this verse in particular, right? If a man meets a virgin who is not betrothed and sees it and lies with her. So the question here on this regulation is also a reflection on the father of the young woman and the father's role in ensuring that his daughters are protected and cared for. So I think this is also a reflection on fathers, that they are to prevent this from happening. So, and this is...
the father makes out good here. He gets 50 shekels.
I mean, I'd have to do my currency exchange rate to see how much 50 shekels, was back then. But certainly...
And then his daughter is married off. Also a potential benefit.
Could be. we'll have to revisit this passage in particular, since we've run short on time. We've gone
over time.
Yeah, we've gone over time though. But nevertheless, this has been enjoyable, a lot of fun. I will fight tooth and nail that 2 Samuel 12 is an implicit condemnation on polygamy, but I don't know that I said implicit, not explicit, implicit. But I don't know that your case is yet to be made. We'll have to probably bring you back on here that Yahweh supports and condones, promotes polygamy in the Old Testament. Rather, I think it's permitted and allowed, and God works within that, regulates it, etc. Remember, we've got that warning in Deuteronomy 17:17 about a king pursuing more wives, and then in 2 Samuel 12, there's the verse you brought up about Yahweh saying, "I would have provided more wives." Right? The issue doesn't.
Yes, that's for my point.
But I think you could almost read that as a sarcastic, that it wouldn't have been enough. Even if he had more women, he still would have wanted Bathsheba.
But God doesn't do it. Okay, let's take homosexuality. God doesn't go like, you can have gay sex over there. I'll throw more male butts at you. He doesn't do that.
Now we're going to have to put this as an explicit E in the...
Sorry.
Oh, too funny. Okay.
Like I just don't understand. And I hear the point you're making, and I'm not saying polygamy is good. I just don't understand sex in the Old Testament in general. I don't understand the incrementalism. I don't understand why texts aren't more just.
Yeah, well, and again, so the incrementalism is that there has been moral progress made. I mean, I don't think you could doubt that. You haven't doubted moral progress has been made. So the question is, how do we then evaluate the people whose shoulders we stand upon over the centuries, right? Where we are today is
we're not talking about standing on their shoulders. We're talking about standing on God's shoulders.
Ultimately as the source, yes. But I don't think if God presented 21st century moral regulations to a, multi-thousand year before Christ society, that wouldn't have even translated to those people because their world was just so different. So, yeah, the question is then, how do we morally evaluate that society? And any society. I think we should almost do a case study by separating ourselves from the Israelites and look at other societies and try to understand those societies and understand why they had their laws and regulations. And we might come away thinking, golly, they did the best they could. They could have done better, but they pursued proximate justice. So that's kind of basically my position, rather than an approach that says, like Rouser, that these are great moral evils that were regulated and allowed to happen. So yeah, it's a tricky subject for sure. But again, we're doing the best we can. We are striving for truth. We are trying to clarify the complex issues. And it's hard when we live so far away from the cultural time that the Israelites lived in. So we've got to do our best.
Well, thank you for your time. Thank you for letting me yell at you. I appreciate you, and thank you.
Yeah, always a pleasure, Dante. We'll bring you on again, I'm sure, in the future. Thanks so much for coming on.
Bye.
All right, well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation just now with Dante Stack. He's a great guy. He's written a number of books called the Solve the World series, so you can search Amazon for those. Fun fiction, and I think it's also an audio, I forget what he calls it, but it's like an audio story where it's all read. It's big production, a lot of fun there. We can drop a link on veracityhill.com. If you go to today's episode post, we'll give a link to the Solve the World book series there. I hope you also enjoyed the conversation that I had with Mike Austin on sort of the case against Christian nationalism. He's got this new book coming out, and we've dropped the link in the comments for those that want to pre-order the book. I encourage you to do so. Next week, I'll be reflecting on my conversations over the past couple weeks with Tim Stratton and Josh Klein, and on today's conversation with Mike Austin, and be giving a little bit of my thoughts on Christian nationalism and sort of the good, the bad and the ugly that I see. I'm still learning myself on this particular subject, which is why I've invited guests to come on. And if you want to make sure you don't miss next week's episode, be sure to smash that subscribe button on YouTube. We are over 1,000 subs now. Very excited about that. We've unlocked the Super Chat feature. And thank you to all the subscribers that are new to our channel. And I hope that you enjoy the content, that you're sharing our videos. And if you are listening via podcast, I would love to have you write up a review of Veracity Hill. You can talk about the good things you like about the show, ways to improve. We would love to hear from you as well. If you want to submit a comment or question, you ask me, you can go to veracityhill.com. We have a contact form. And I've already seen some people pop up. They've already used it during this stream. And so I thank those that have shared the video. We'll be sure to get your book out to you, Wise Stewards, and by Mike Austin on Christian parenting. The benefit here is we still have more books remaining. So if you're listening to this and we're no longer live, that's okay. Still share the video, contact us, and we'll send you a free book. Okay, well, that does it for the show today. I am grateful for the continued support of our patrons. Those are folks that just chip in a few bucks each month to help our program and the sustainability of Veracity Hill. If you enjoy this content and other material from Veracity Hill, consider becoming one of our monthly supporters of any amount, $5, $10, $20, even $50 a month. We'd love to have your support for this ministry. I'm also grateful for the support of our sponsors, Defenders Media, Apologetics 315, and Rethinking Hell. I want to thank our technical producer, Gabe, for all the fine work that he's done today, to our guests, Mike Austin and Dante Stack. And last but certainly not least, I want to thank you for listening in and for striving for truth on Christian nationalism.
This has been Veracity Hill, a viewer and listener-supported program. For more resources, including past shows, visit veracityhill.com.